Hello and welcome to Forever Motorsports here for our daily live news roundup. Here today we have quite a lot of news for you. Definitely not what I've been able to say for the past couple of weeks. Glad at least that we are in a race week where there is quite a lot of news to talk to all of you guys about. So straight into it though for today is that we have Max Verstappen possibly getting taken to court and being fined for speeding in Monaco. Of course, Monaco is very, very strict about their speeding laws, and I mean, often during Grand Prix race weekends, if you speed through the tunnel that goes through Monaco, they will impound your car and confiscate it for massive amounts of money if you don't pay it back. So, just reading an article here from the sportsrush.com, Max Verstappen taken to court for move endangering lives of pedestrians. Of course, it's a bit of a clickbaity title from them, but nonetheless, the summer break had the entire Formula One community missing the high speed on track action. Turns out, Max Verstappen was missing it too. While leading an unchallenged charge on the grid, Verstappen might have taken it a step too far with a side quest on the Monaco streets. A recent video stormed the internet as Verstappen took his $2.7 million Aston Martin Valkyrie to the streets of Monaco. Albeit hardcore, Verstappen is seen pushing his beast to the limit. Filmed by Kelly Piquet, his current partner's cousin, the video was very soon on every fan's screen. It was definitely all over Twitter, and I mean, I was watching that all weekend long, and I did manage to spot that speedometer on his dash and thought maybe he might get into trouble for that, and he has. Additionally, Verstappen is also seen confidently maneuvering the console on the hypercar while driving with one hand. For a driver who made an entry into Formula One before getting a driver's license, the Red Bull champion knew what he was doing. However, that is no argument for breaking the law. Max Verstappen could go behind bars over reckless driving. Once again, another clickbaity title. According to the Nice Martin, Verstappen could get prosecuted for, in quotes, endangering the lives of others. It is also mentioned that Verstappen goes a daring 120 kilometers per hour on a 90 kilometer an hour road. Going viral has its cursed as a specialized cell, the General Directorate of the National Gendarmerie, definitely French, tracks down these kind of videos broadcast on social networks. While going to jail would be an extreme for a place like Monaco, it is still in the books for the driver. However, a closer look at the France traffic laws likely point towards a fine for Max Verstappen. Since Verstappen was 30 kilometers an hour over the indicated limit, he would have to pay a €135 fine instead. Surely this was not a stunt Verstappen would have wanted to pull before returning to the grid for his home Grand Prix. But nonetheless, I mean, €135 is absolutely nothing to Max Verstappen. I think he had to pay €15,000 last season for touching Lewis Hamilton's rear wing. So, I mean, that is really nothing for him at the moment. But just Twitter is all over the place at the moment with all of the memes being shared saying breaking new Max Verstappen merch just dropped, and then showing an inmate in orange overalls. And another post that I reposted on my Twitter. Please do be sure to go and follow my Twitter if you'd like to see all of the memes and other Formula One news that I do repost. There's a video of a whole bunch of inmates dancing, and that is the Orange Army waiting to greet Max Verstappen as he goes to jail. It's just F1 Twitter as per usual. But nonetheless, that's an interesting little article there. I don't necessarily think we'll get Max Verstappen going to prison for sure for that. He'll definitely get a fine, but yes, surely he won't be doing that again anytime soon. Now, with another article here, Formula One news from FanNation.com. Nick de Vries could make a surprise Formula One comeback. Unexpectedly, Nick de Vries could soon be seen in a Red Bull Formula One car. In a shocking twist of events, you could witness former AlphaTauri driver Nick de Vries back in the team's Formula One car, or perhaps even in one of the RB19 during the Mexico City Grand Prix weekend. However, he would be racing as a reserve driver. De Vries was dropped from his AlphaTauri racing seat on performance grounds when he failed to meet their expectations. He was replaced by Red Bull's reserve driver Daniel Ricciardo. Now, though, it is Red Bull Jr. Liam Lawson who is serving as the team's reserve driver for the remainder of the season. However, Lawson is participating in the Japan-based Super Formula Championship, whose last two races coincide with the Mexico Grand Prix. Therefore, he would be unable to perform his reserve driver duties, but there is a chance of De Vries being asked to drive for the Red Bull and AlphaTauri suits as a reserve. So, after being dropped by Red Bull and AlphaTauri, he could still have to provide his driving skills as a reserve driver in Mexico City. Nonetheless, I mean, a bit difficult for him, of course. It's been a bit of a heartbreaker season for Nick De Vries. But unfortunately, when you are still technically under contracts by a team, you can still be called upon for reserve driver duties, and that is a major possibility for him in Mexico. Moving on to the next article, though, a team in transition. How Alfa Romeo are balancing short-term targets with a long-term planning ahead of the Audi switch. So, sixth place in the last year's Constructors' Championship was the Alfa Sauber run, and their team's best result for a decade, and raised hopes of continued progression ahead of Audi's arrival in 2026, when they will become a works operation. But that hasn't transpired this year, with the Swiss team down in ninth and struggling to get on terms with their midfield rivals. They've scored in 4 races, one more than rivals Williams and Haas, but there have been lower scores, leaving them 2 points adrift of the duo. The C43 has had a few peaks over one lap, with Zhou qualifying a superb 5th in Hungary, but it has largely been erratic. On Sunday afternoons, their long run pace hasn't been consistent enough, in part because they haven't been able to keep up with their rivals in the development race, or they haven't made too many mistakes, either operationally or with regards to production. It's been quite a difficult season for Alfa Romeo, who, as they say, certainly have been off the pace of their rival teams. Zhou has had a couple outstanding races. Bottas has also had a couple outstanding races this season, but really they haven't been a team that we've been all that interested in this season, and they haven't been much of a talking point at all. As Lawrence Barreto does say, though, they have not been able to keep up with the developmental pace of their rivals this season. I mean, the likes of AlphaTauri have made major step-ups in terms of their development this season. They've gone from one of the worst cars on the grid to now battling it in for some of the midfield positions in certain races. Of course, they're still not 100% up to pace, but, I mean, if we look at the likes of McLaren, who have made major my English today is really struggling. Developmental gains this season. McLaren really does have to be the standouts this season for that, because they've gone from the worst car on the grid to second or third best now at the moment. Hopefully they'll be able to keep up that pace throughout the rest of the season. Hopefully we'll see Alfa Romeo making some big gains as well, because that would be quite exciting to see another car from the midfield making its way up into that top 3 battle. I doubt it, unfortunately, but nonetheless, it could be quite exciting if they do make a bit of a gain before the end of the season, because we want to see more teams in that top 5 battle. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen Valtteri Bottas and another team other than Mercedes fighting it out for that top 5 positions, and he's been pushing that car as high as it can go in qualifying, albeit it doesn't have all that much pace, and I don't think he's made it through to Q3 many times this season. Nonetheless, though, I mean, Audi are making their way into the sport in the next year or two, taking over from Alfa Romeo. So it's going to be quite difficult for Valtteri Bottas at the moment. He's going to be wanting to show that he does still have a lot of pace in that car, because Audi don't necessarily have to stick with the current drivers that they have in that team. And there is a lot of talk, of course, about Carlos Sainz making his way into the team. A lot of talk about maybe a Mick Schumacher, because it's a German team, German name. Surely they'd love to have a name Schumacher in that Audi seat. But still a lot of time and a lot of work to do for Audi before they can make announcements as to who they are going to be signing for their major team in 2026. Of course, they do take over next year. But nonetheless, will they keep the current Alfa Romeo drivers, or will they try and bring some new blood into that Alfa Romeo Audi team. It will become Sauber Audi next year, but at the moment it is still Alfa Romeo Sauber. So on to our next article. Moving away from Formula 1 a little bit, going over to other motorsports, going to Grosjean, who compares Formula 1 and IndyCar. He says IndyCar is running 30 years behind Formula 1 in terms of technology, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Romain Grosjean left Formula 1 at the end of 2020, where he made a switch to the USA and IndyCar. I've just lost that article quickly. The Frenchman was a guest on the Track Limit podcast, where Grosjean pointed at the biggest differences between Formula 1 and the famous American racing class. Grosjean compares IndyCar and Formula 1. In the final years of his Formula 1 career, Grosjean drove for Haas, and in 2021, Grosjean and his teammate Kevin Magnussen had to make way for Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. Yes, that was on purpose. I'm not saying his real surname, which allowed Grosjean to switch to IndyCar. So far, the former Formula 1 driver has been on the podium 10 times in the American class. He was quoted as saying, "It was very refreshing, very different, more human and casual in IndyCar, which was good after doing 10 years in Formula 1. I loved my time in Formula 1, but 10 years in the same job is a long time. So even though it's passion, I felt like something new would be great. And I really enjoyed coming to IndyCar, having a lot of fun, and I'm excited to know that every time we go to a race, I've got a chance to win it," Grosjean says. All Indy cars are almost identical, with their chassis and aerodynamic packages being very similar across all teams. This has been something that we've been wanting for Formula 1 over multiple years. Of course, you can't necessarily make it a spec series. That does take a lot away from Formula 1, because it's a racing series where teams really do want to push the boundaries in terms of aerodynamics, in terms of mechanical engineering, in terms of everything really, as we're seeing with Red Bull. Moving on though, he says the IndyCar is about 30 years behind Formula 1 technology-wise. Grosjean begins. Formula 1 cars are a punch faster than the cars in the American class. We don't want to push it. It is not cheap, but they're not too expensive to run. And the racing action is probably one of the best around the world on track. You keep your hands on the steering wheel more, and you're focusing more on your driving rather than changing switches. And the cars are phenomenal. I mean, this is certainly true. We see great racing in IndyCar. I mean, Indy 500 is always a staple for racing fans across the world to watch. Never mind if you're a Formula 1 fan, if you're a NASCAR fan, if you're a devout IndyCar fan. I mean, everyone loves watching the Indy 500, and there are those really spectacular IndyCar races where they just have such amazing action out on track. You don't know who's going to win the race until the last couple of laps, and I mean, that's what we're wanting for Formula 1, and we haven't really had it this year. Of course, Max Verstappen being super dominant, not necessarily down to the car, but also just him being at the peak of his career and on absolute form at the moment. We don't want to see drivers and teams just blitzing ahead of everyone else. We want to see what they have in IndyCar. We want to see a lot closer racing between teams, and maybe that is because we just have these the fundamentals of Formula 1. We want to see the best cars being brought forward, and we're seeing that with Red Bull and Max Verstappen, but we don't want to see it being introduced at the detriment of racing, because of course it's made it very, very difficult for other teams to catch up. They haven't been able to catch up, even with Red Bull having massive penalties this year with regards to engine testing, with regards to aerodynamic testing, of course, because of that cost cap breach from 2020, I think it was 2022, being introduced, their penalties for this year. But I mean, it does provide a bit of a spark and a bit of a debate whether Formula 1 should move away from being this pinnacle of motorsport and should create maybe a bit more of a spec series to allow better racing for the fans, not only for the fans, just better racing in terms of the sport in general, because it is just going to bring a lot more viewership across to the sport if we do have exciting races every single weekend. Yeah, it's something to talk about. I'm sure a lot of people will be speaking about it. Glad to see we do have PDCRL in our comment section. Thank you very much for joining us on our stream. Please do be sure to vote. I'm going to put up a bit of a poll here. Should we move Formula 1 to more of a spec series. Like IndyCar. Once again, my spelling is atrocious. Like IndyCar. And that is now live, so please do be sure to go and vote for that. Moving on though to our next article after Roman Grosjean. We did speak a little bit about, I think it was Liam Lawson in the Super Formula Series. I actually don't have this article up, but nonetheless, I would like to speak about it because major news about Liam Lawson over the weekend. Gosh, major accident in the Super Formula Series in Japan. Wow, that incident was just massive. Liam Lawson did start the race in first. He moved over across the racing line. I think it was in turn 3 or 4. Liam Lawson crash Suzuka. Let's see if that should, yes. So Red Bull Junior Lawson triggers frightening Super Formula crash, and the crash brought about the red flags as multiple cars flew airborne. There was even a car that went over another car and literally went up in the air, did a 180 and landed on the ground. Luckily, the driver was all right. Reading through this article now, Red Bull Junior Liam Lawson was the catalyst for a frightening incident in the Super Formula race at Monteghi. New Zealander entered the round level on top in the standings, but was left spinning on the exit of turns 1 and 2 after trying pass Team Mugen teammate Tomoki Najuri for the lead. His car was left sitting on the racing line and the pack behind bunched at the start of the race. Contact was inevitable. Tadasuke Makino and Yui Sekiguchi were collected, with both drivers sent flying over Lawson's car. I'm going to struggle. It is Japan Super Formula, so there's a lot of Japanese names, but nonetheless, I will try my best. Just watching a replay of this incident, though, I mean, gosh, it was really quite a high energy incident there with Makino really going over Lawson's car there and being sent airborne. Very glad, though, that the Halo did its job yet again, because we did see another car pretty much coming up towards that Halo. If there wasn't a Halo there, it would have gone into the driver's head. Luckily for the Halo, though, it did possibly save his life. Once again, the Halo proving that it does belong in motorsports. I mean, I was one of the people that hated the look of the Halo, and now I'm extremely grateful for the introduction of it, because without it, we could have had some serious incidents in the past few years. We could have lost Charles Leclerc, we could have lost Lewis Hamilton, could have lost Max Verstappen, even Zhou Guanyu. I mean, just really glad to have that Halo being introduced into the sport and saving a lot of drivers' lives in the past few years. Our next article, though, the most wanted man in Formula 1. After bouncing back from Red Bull heartbreak, Albon looks to be set as a key player in the 2025 driver market. Alex Albon currently performing at the top of his form, really outperforming the Williams car at the moment, outperforming his teammate Logan Sargent. He is just having an absolute stellar drive at the moment in that Williams car. Moving on from this article written by Lawrence Barreto, Formula 1 correspondent and presenter, Alex Albon is living proof that if you get knocked down in motor racing, you can get back up and be significantly stronger for it. The Thai driver's future in Formula 1 looked bleak when he was dropped as a race driver by Red Bull at the end of 2020. But he took the olive branch handed out by the energy drinks company with both hands by accepting a reserve role and set out using the additional chance to first rebuild his confidence, then develop an inner steel to strengthen his resolve and help efficiently utilize his immense talent on a racetrack. So, Alex Albon did get dropped, unfortunately, by that Red Bull team, but nonetheless, he was given an olive branch by Red Bull to be their reserve driver. He stuck around for that year where he was not in motorsport. Unfortunately, he went across to DTM. He kept himself busy there. He did really well there. I think coming first in the championship, first or second, he did really well nonetheless. And then he did get offered a race seat this year by Red Bull, who bought him a race seat in Williams. And since being in that Williams seat, he has really done well for himself. He's consistently gotten into the points. He's done, I mean, just brilliantly in terms of pace in that Williams. getting it into Q3. Just logging in here to read the rest of this article. Formula One don't let you read the whole article unless you do have a subscription. Carrying on though, Albon is like a different person to the one who was so mentally bruised after being axed by Red Bull. The tension he carried throughout his body has ebbed away. The exhausting mental pressure that ground away inside his head has eased dramatically. His infectious smile is back and he's living his best life. When I speak to him in the TV pen after sessions on a race weekend, he's refreshingly open and analytical, regardless of whether it's been a good or bad day. Williams are absolutely loving him at the moment. He's been a breath of fresh air around the halls of Grove and inside the team's hospitality unit and garage at the racetracks. Aside from the fact that he's incredibly funny and endearing, making him someone you want to hang around with, he's developed himself into an all-round racing driver who delivers results. When former Williams boss Jos Capito signed him up, he tasked Albon with being a leader, the first time he's held that role in Formula One. Putting the knockbacks and pain he'd suffered at Red Bull as Max Verstappen's teammate behind him, Albon delivered on his request with aplomb. His work in the simulator is like gold dust for engineers. His feedback crucial in helping the team across the board, from arriving at a race weekend with a good baseline to develop out problems quickly and finding performance as a week goes on. When he gets behind the wheel, the engineers know that near enough 100% of the time, Albon gets everything out of the car. That's the holy grail for engineers, as the driver variable is ruthlessly consistent, and that makes it easier to assess what is working and what isn't working on the car itself. His commitment on track, both in attack and defense, has been a wonder, especially as the Williams lacks downforce, and when opportunities for points are presented, he almost always delivers. The one blip was Australia when he crashed when running in the top 6, but that was quickly forgotten because they have seen enough to know that it was a blip, and one that will occur when you're consistently taking a car to the ragged edge. It is no surprise then that Williams are keen to hold on to him for the long term, beyond the end of his current deal with Williams, which is currently set to expire at the end of 2024. I'm in a good place. There's no denying that, says Albon, when assessing his current form. Firstly, this is my second year with the team, which is always a bit of a luxury in some ways. I come to every race and I know how the car felt last year. I know the areas we struggled with. Cars don't change that much. Downforce can, but characteristics take a bit more time to change. With the inherent experience, I do feel confidence in the car. It feels like we've been executing weekends very well. There have not been many moments apart from the Melbourne race that I would like to say we haven't been able to execute points when we've had the chance to. Things are going well. We do feel like I'm driving well, but as a team, we're making good progress. Albon and his management have a tough call to make. If they stay at Williams, they know it could be 5 or 6 years at the earliest before they are competitive. By then, Albon will be 32 or 33. That's still a decade younger than Alonso, but those years could well end up being his best. Stay. Though, and if Williams continue to improve and become a force in the future, not only will Albon have played a significant role in that revival, but he'll have a team built around him. There's so much interest from other teams though. Many of Red Bull's senior engineers are understood to rate him very highly. It is believed that there have been conversations, either formal or informal, with at least half the grid, some of which sources tell me are top teams. The driver market is wide open for 2025, and aside from McLaren, every single team have at least one seat available. So surely Albon will have a big role to play in that 2025 driver market, because a lot of teams seem to be very, very interested in signing him as their next number 1 driver, or possibly even a number 2 driver. Nonetheless, I think he'd be a great addition to any Formula One team down the grid. He is able to extract the absolute maximum out of every car. Certainly, he struggled a little bit in Red Bull, but I think that was because the amount of sheer pressure that was put onto his shoulders, being brought into the team midway through the season, replacing Pierre Gasly, and only being given half a season to prove himself, was certainly not very fair on the young Alex Albon. And he seems to be doing a lot better now in the Williams car, a lot less pressure on his shoulders, and just absolutely performing at the best of his abilities. Just watching him throughout the rest of the season, I think is certainly going to be an absolute, just pleasure for all of us because he provides such great races for us, provides great on-track action, and I think every weekend myself and Mark really do look forward to watching what he is able to do. Moving on to the next article, Lawrence Barretto says here, the pressure was on Piastri after the Alpine McLaren tug of war. So how is his rookie season going so far? Oscar Piastri ended his rookie campaign with Oscar Piastri entered his rookie campaign with great expectations of his youthful 22-year-old shoulders. McLaren had thrown the proverbial kitchen sink at securing his signature, tempting him away from Alpine after a legal battle that went all the way to Formula One's contract recognition board. To have two teams turning to lawyers to sign you despite never having turned a wheel in anger in Formula One is quite something. But you earn that kind of pedigree when you win the Formula 3 and Formula 2 titles back to back, only a feature two drivers currently have achieved, George Russell and Charles Leclerc, certainly drivers who have proved themselves in their own right. Big things were expected then, when he made his debut alongside the highly rated Lando Norris, then close to Piastri. Plus, those who have worked with him in junior Formula were confident he could cope with the pressure. As it turned out, he needed to be mentally strong when the car rolled out in Bahrain, as the MCL16 he had at his disposal was extremely woeful. I mean, we spoke about this already. The McLaren at the beginning of the season were absolutely dismal, but the team, having changed development direction late last year and thus started the season with a compromised car, he'd have to wait until Silverstone in the summer to get their real car. In some ways, that took the pressure off of the Aussie, as it was clear he didn't have the car to score the points. He failed to make it out of Q1 in Bahrain, but caught everyone's attention by making it into Q3 at the following race in Saudi Arabia. He scored his first points in his home Grand Prix in round 3 and scored another on the tight and twisty streets in Monaco. He just missed out in Baku and Canada with a brace of 11 places. If you assess his performance purely based on the driver's standings, it was solid, but not spectacular. But those inside the team who saw his data up close will tell you Piastri was making progress very, very quickly. When he got the upgraded car at Silverstone, minus the front wing, which would have cost him around a tenth of a second per lap relative to Norris, he excelled, taking 4th, which would have been a 3rd and a 1st podium had it not been for an ill-timed safety car which robbed him of that 3rd position. I remember Mark and I being quite upset during that race because he did get that 3rd and 1st podium place for himself being stolen just by that safety car being ill-timed. He followed that up with 5th next time out in Hungary, where a podium could again have been on the cards had he not sustained damage. And then he secured his first top 3 finish with 2nd in the sprint race at Spa. He accumulated 29 points in the last 3 races. Only Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton and Norris scored more. Not bad for a rookie, eh? I feel like it's solid, said Piastri on his season so far. There's been some moments where I wish I could have been, where I wish I could have had again, but this is bound to happen in a rookie season, and some moments I've been very proud of as well. I said before the year, if I had to make mistakes, I wanted to make sure I made them once, then learn from them and not make them again. For the most part, that's been the case. There have maybe been a few more mistakes than I would have liked, but being in the world of Formula One, not racing last year, that has to be expected. That is a tough assessment, some might have to say harsh, but that is down to the high expectation Piastri has put on himself, which is similar to teammate Lando Norris, that he has adjusted very quickly to the life in Formula One with a car that was initially difficult to drive and has inherent traits that Daniel Ricciardo never got a handle on. And Norris has said even he finds it a challenge to tame. It's very impressive that Piastri knows he still has a lot to earn, picking out racecraft as an area in where he wants to improve, as he only has 12 Grand Prix in his career so far. That's only 12 opportunities to experience going wheel to wheel in a high pressure racing environment that is Formula One. I've certainly been very impressed with Oscar Piastri's races so far this season, especially since he has been given a more competitive car. He's rarely been challenging his teammates, and in some races outperforming his teammates, with the likes of the Belgian Grand Prix sprint race. I think Oscar Piastri is certainly going to be a driver to watch throughout the rest of the season and throughout the rest of his career for sure, because I think he is going to be one of the next great drivers for sure. Uh, if he gets given a car that is competitive enough, I think Lando Norris is certainly going to have to be a little bit careful, because if he doesn't keep the pace going, I think Oscar Piastri is going to be there to pick up the pieces. Uh, Nonetheless, moving over to our final article here for today. Why Ben Sulayem pushes on the new team process despite Formula One criticisms. This is an article from motorsport.com speaking about Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the president of the FIA, still vying and pushing to get 12 teams on the Formula One grid, despite Formula One teams pushing back against this. The FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, has defended his decision to open up a tender process for new Formula One teams, despite the unease it has caused. Earlier this year, Motorsports' governing body invited potential new teams to express their interest in joining the Formula One grid as early as 2025. The evaluation process of those applications is ongoing, with several teams including Andretti Cadillac, High-Tech, Craig Pollock's Formula Equal, and LKY Sons going public with their ambitions. Other teams including Roden Carlin and an entry from Asia were also linked to potential Formula One bids, but the move to expand the Formula One grid has not gone down well in the Grand Prix paddock, with Formula One CEO Stefano Domenicali skeptical about the need to expand the number of entries beyond the current 10 teams. Furthermore, rival Formula One teams themselves are not impressed about the prospect of getting more cars on the grid. They have publicly questioned the commercial implications of needing to share the revenue with extra parties, as well as logistical issues relating to the number of pit garages available. But Ben Sulayem is unmoved by the doubts about the new team entries and thinks he and the FIA have done the right thing in trying to get more cars on the grid. Speaking exclusively to Motorsports' sister site, motorsportstotal.com, Ben Sulayem said, "We have a contract, and our contract says we have up to 12 teams, so we are not breaking the rules. We are, on the contrary, fulfilling the rules. The FIA, as a regulator, has to look at all the requests, and we did. The expressions of interest was the right thing to do. I know some of the teams are not happy because I can see the financial impact on them. Is it adding a team, or do they need to buy an existing team? That's not for me to impose on big teams, but what we have to do is the process and the due diligence on the financial and the technical side." Carrying on with this article, the original deadline for the applications to be judged was the end of June, but this timeline has now slipped back because the FIA wants to ensure that it conducts a thorough analysis of all the entries. It is possible that a decision may come shortly after the Formula One summer break. We extended it because some of the teams requested some time, and you don't want to exclude them, added Ben Sulayem. We have to be flexible. We are not yet over with it because teams have to be very careful with making a decision. It is a big process, and I don't like to be rushed because the decision has to be very, very clear. Asked when a decision could be expected, he said, "Not far away, I think. 4 to 6 weeks. We need to do it right, and we are talking about big investment from people. We just have to wait for the next 6 weeks to see what is the plan. I have no doubt that Formula One management will do the right decision. They know what's better." Ben Sulayem said that there are between 5 and 6 applications made, with 3 or 4 of them being extremely serious. As the FIA closes on a decision over the new teams, the stakes involved are incredibly high. One scenario that sources have suggested that could happen, is that 1 or 2 of the new teams are given approval based on being technically capable of entering Formula One, but do not get an entry because a commercial deal cannot reach that satisfies Formula One media and the current Formula One squads. Critical to the approval of a new Formula One team and is the level of the anti-dilution fee that should be paid to other teams to compensate them for a potential loss of commercial rights income. That is currently set at a whopping $200 million in the Concord Agreement, but it is suggested that this figure will be raised to be up to 3 times higher in the future. Should one of the interested new Formula One teams get rejected at this late stage, then that could open the door to potential legal action, something that Ben Sulayem admits is possible. What if one of the applying teams takes us to court? They can if we say no to them, said Sulayem. It's not about me. I am the one implementing the rules. One of the practical issues that has cropped up in the relation to the teams is that many of Formula One's current tracks do not have enough garage spaces to accommodate them. There have also been claims that there could be safety issues in qualifying if there are more than 20 cars on the track at the same time. I think that's bullshit, as we do have a lot more drivers and cars running during World Endurance Championship races, which take place at a lot of these Formula One tracks. But Ben Sulayem has rubbished such suggestions, as he says that the presence of the Apple Formula One movie featuring Brad Pitt, which has had its own garage at the certain races, shows what is possible. We are currently running an 11 team across because of Hollywood, he said, and the tracks have been improving. The FIA is always there with the circuits and looking for constant ways to improve. So, I mean, this just shows, of course, Formula One teams don't necessarily want to dilute their stake in Formula One, but I certainly think that the FIA is doing the right decision and making the right call in trying to bring in more teams for Formula One, because it could improve the racing and improve the commerciality of the sport, bringing in more and more teams. Nonetheless, it's been a very, very exciting bunch of news. It could be very exciting to see more teams making their way into Formula One. I see we do have Mark Sparks now in the comments section saying you missed most of the show. Never mind, it will go up once again once I end this, and you can go and rewatch all of the latest Formula One news and action that is going down throughout the rest of the grid. It is ramping up to be an exciting race weekend, though. Please do be sure to watch all of the other daily Formula One news videos, as well as join us for all of our live streams for the Dutch Grand Prix this race weekend. I've been Reece here on Forever Motorsports. Please do be sure to like and subscribe to the video and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to follow for all of the upcoming content this race weekend and a lot more content that is going to be brought onto this Forever Motorsports channel. We also do now have a Discord channel, so if you want to see even more Formula One content, do be sure to go and check that link in the description. Thank you very much for joining me, though, here for my Formula One live news video. I have been Reece yet again. Thank you very much. Cheers.